pulsating sundresses, smiling mouths, and creased cheeks. I long to see my tormentor, the voice that penetrates deep and speaks of the hive, for it claims that it is all. A singularity only manifests through the collapse of something magnificently violent, and humanity nears its return to the source hidden in an impenetrable void. The soldier's life leaves through a gurgle of staggered breath. I am naked, the way man began, and the way he shall end. I remove the digit from my newly formed aperture, and much time begins to pass as I look upon the stiffening form before me. Pallor mortis and algor mortis give way to the next step of nature's efficiency. Chemicals interact with muscles that once served the owner a functional utility required to interact with the physical world. This is what we are. Rigor mortis and fleeting ethereal fairies, caught by the net in the cosmos and placed in glass jars, made of the cure to our ideology. I hum a hymn to myself. It brings tears to my eyes, and I indulge my pain, letting it orgasm all it has in a squawk of confusion. Light starts at the feet and raises to the ceiling, and missiles wander like lost dogs through a tired sky, landing anywhere and killing anything. I see the contours of an object in his breast pocket. It is a compass. And such an object reminds me of the abstract concept of morality. Nietzsche dedicated a book to what lies beyond our notions of good and evil. Much of philosophy concerned itself with ethics, despite the growing reality that it matters not. The ideals of society that stimulated the minds of great thought masturbators are nothing but diseased dreams caught in the dream catcher of war. A hive tells me that dementia sets in and will deform our reality into dying echoes reverberating up from walls of free will and disorientated nature. I long to exist in such an abstract, a modern art retelling akin to the post-modernity that swelled before the final conflict. Classical lines and color are reduced to the bizarre, the dissolution of our silly narratives on existence. Why should I believe? Why should I not kill this soldier without attempting it? Cursing to the blackness, I would quarrel with the silent architect over the repercussions of our free will. My tongue snarled at the deviations of choice, and how the rest of my kind had held it as a vice against me, misunderstanding that the physical body encompasses all, and as such, so should the ethereal. The god of ideologies, a deity forged in man's ambitions of ultimate power and justifying wrath, left one thing deductible in its absence of observable existence. No teleological argument could grant my mind solace. And so, like Descartes, I dissected, but not my own existence under the guise of an evil being, but God under the guise of man. And as such, I knew two things. God is all man aspires to be, and whatever waits for us on the other side has the virtue of patience. Now I am to be the last of humankind, not a god, but an eater of one, consuming the mind that concocted our existence. This invasive alien species chose me as its vessel, and what is left of me that identified with sapiens is dwindling, for I am the parasite that burrows deep, a vicarious wish fulfillment, to be something outside of the material of all I have known. Since the organ encased within the fragile dome grew sentient, it became biased in its own existence. Even the mass production of others like it could not deter such distinctive importance that surrounded the individual perception. Cursed with a candle that burns too fast, reproducing was the only viable option for extension to the realist. Then came ideology, the most detrimental being that of infinity, endless existence that only occurs when existence ceases. A divine paradox. Socrates drank the poisoned chalice to teach his disciples the final lesson, that the human should not fear death, for it is nothing more than a binary of life. He believed that the mind and life in turn connected the individual to all that it encompassed, and to disconnect was only achievable through the finality of death. A hive knows no disconnect. And while we may be granted a dreamless sleep or a renewal through another existence, the singularity of all consciousnesses only knows to create. The infection lay in the soil beneath the primordial soup, a singular cell with a predilection for complexities that dwarfed its own. The sepsis of our origins spread, evolved, mutated viciously, and clambered out of the liquid that swelled its fever until the physical symptom presented itself as legs. I imagined the first rendition of the human mind dragged a stone across the sand, saw the grains part in fear. Notions of nature's reaction to man's action began as a whimper, and thus begat the appetite of tyranny, an individual stone held in a single hand, parting thousands of grains with one line. This was our purest form, the primal outline of the hive, before details had cross-hatched their way within our perimeters. We saw what one could do to many, and it aroused us in every conceivable way. I imagine the hive felt such raw and virgin sensations too, watching the cell make its first move with the awful wisdom that our interactions with this simulacrum would amount to nothing more than the graces of one. Chapter 2. The Walk. A tiny figure creeps from debris and swirling clouds of devastation. She has matted white hair and phosphorus stalk eyebrows. Her eyes are sunken and brown. The child scampers through scorched concrete and dismembered segments of what was once the shell that harbored blood and soul alike. Cautious thing, head jolts like a frightened cat, and she moves off through a decaying landscape like something feral. A swell of rot and feces peels the wallpaper. Death is a moist biological purge. I stand by the window half engulfed in night and day with naked curvatures drawn by pale strokes. Golden waves vomit on one another in the distance, curling like light around the event horizon of a black hole. Walk my earth. I shall hide. And with that, I step out from the room that fills with death, walking down the messed road that leads further into conflict. Buildings resemble scrunched bodies caught in the winds of Dante's Inferno, and clouds drip and splutter as weeds find their way through concrete coffins. My feet sink deep, and I feel my soles melt into every idiosyncrasy that which lies beneath them has to offer, a joyous novelty for the parasite, and a reinvigoration for what is left of me. I walk for hours. The duality of my mind watches the sinew dance nestled within the contractions of my legs, noting in the reflections of intact glass. My knees quiver and my stomach tightens in a maze of lines and creases, an instrument of all discharged from a callous monism. The leech inside of me begins a whisper, deep within my cerebral cortex, writhing amongst gray matter and neurons, clinging as if it were the homunculus. The hive, through ruminations of its own solitude, begat the ontology all humans know. We evolved within its mind. It segregated us, feeding our souls to the great illusionary pigeon of matter. An awful trick was within our dimension, bound to the linearity of time, doomed to continuity. Only an insidious punisher parallel to the void of evil around the sunlight of good could bestow self-awareness on an entity that not only deteriorates, but is overcome with the sensations of such. It wishes to understand all it is capable of, trapping its tulpas on a pendulum that sways from the beginning to the end. The Heisenberg effect alters the behavior of that which is observed, yet humanity has been in the panopticon of existence since our inception, and deep down, we knew. Therefore, our behavior was never natural. We recognized our mere unfurling was like a puppet raising its arm. The lights are too dark to see the strings, so we must be responsible. The conclusion one may come to when interrogating why such a mass of experiences in a simulated playground are necessary is that it is for knowledge, for maturity, to evolve through its own thought experiments. This is no experiment, and humanity has not served such a misguided pipe dream as fulfilling the important role of a subject. Do not be late. I would not dream of such, for to delay the existential consummation of the fed and the feeder is too wonderful of a paradox to deny. The child is ahead. Her ghost-like transparency contrasts heavily against the bleak gray of destruction. A scared man holding a rifle springs from the rubble. He is a mixture of blood and dust. I look to him with forgiving graces. He knows not what he does. The parasite echoes. I ask his name. A pleasantry foreboding. I cannot understand his reply. Words seem to exchange meaning, mixing in a spiral of malaise. The man edges closer, the barrel shaking just enough to notice. Maybe I cannot process his identity because I know it is false. This is not an individual, just a product of the hive wrapped in a mesh of hardened bone infrastructure, pumping blood that swirls through facets of biological purpose. The king schizophrenic that lied, telling us all that the delusion was not contagious, lying to the hallucinations for their own sake. Maybe these humans are more than a hallucination. Little is left of my humanity, and with each word I utter it becomes less. Diminishing returns of the mortal soul. The man screams for me to turn back. He tells me he is killed, yanking at the bloodstains on his shirt. A murmuration plagues the sky in a great swath. The hazy, muted sun is briefly scattered, and before the sky is clear again, the man before me is lying on the ground. His nose is crooked and pulsing with crimson. Swelling eyes blink rapidly over a furrowed brow. I have pushed the butt of the gun with vile force, but he has shot me in return. Chapter 3. Immortal Parasite. There is no blood, no wound. Nothing escapes my flesh. And with a terrified, crushed face, the man falls back. The warm barrel of the gun rests inside my palm, and plumes of faint smoke sprawl into turquoise-filtered light. Man asks how I tell of my destiny that I am a parasite, that stomach is empty, and the consequence of such is an insatiable appetite. My words confuse the poor soul. It does not matter. I make him strip so that I may see the body in its element. He shivers and raises his hands above his head. A marvel, the parasite tells me with glee. Such a deformed abomination of extremities, hair, cells, and fluids, all wrapped up in a dying revolution. The answer is not philosophical, nor does it adhere to moral reasoning. It simply wishes to see the process play out and know that the hive experienced it. I say that it has died countless times, and such an experience is only unique down to the minute details. The force of gravity, the posture of the body, the DNA interwoven inside the man, the sound waves as he falls to the floor. The parasite does not divulge more. I know it grows weary of my shared existence, something that should have been snuffed out by now. I am resilient. The soul is comprised of multiples. I wonder, do those words apply to me and the parasite or the hive? There can be no duality in this. Epiphenomenalism likened the conscious mind to a train, a silly comparison and a product of its time. The technology of humans and their concepts of sentience always skip hand in hand, heading toward perceived evolution. How deluded we have all been to experience so little with such short lifespans, and how important many of us have thought we are. Consciousness parallels no technology, for the latter is a concept, another distraction for the offspring of a tenacious, bored mind. The juxtaposition of the hive's mentality exceeds my capacity. I was born limited, constrained by the morsels of the matter I am, but this parasite, it can be all, and maybe even more. However, it does not wish to share the throne, and the more it consumes, the more I starve, sharing pleasures through sensory hallucinations, a vicarious placebo. In the distance, the fluorescent child stamps her form in the ray of light. Her traumatized eyes look at me. I begin a journey in her direction once more. The ground rumbles as brief interludes of screaming blazes evaporate trees and buildings. My eyes see further than before, past the two-dimensional illusion that once impeded them. No longer does that which lies on the horizon appear as if it were flat. I am riding the coattails of ascension. Visible decay no longer extends only to structures of inquisitive hands. Now bodies litter the road. Each of the dead is inspected, flesh contorted into unsavory displays. Bones peek from cloth and black sludge, the gravel and grass drunk on human essence. Before I pass the massacre, the parasite halts my being. There is a woman, hair strewn over her gaunt face, lips blue and pursed slightly. She's faking death, lying in a hill of the deceased, her left arm buried amongst exposed internal anatomy for authenticity's sake. She is the quintessence, the parasite whispers. Of what, I wonder? She is still, and we look at her in admiration. a pale imitation of the stone monuments erected by those with slave moralities, or those with master moralities. Her atoms betray her. The quantum fleets like the wicket that stands on trial against the ultimate moral arbiter. We edge closer, and her charade breaks. The woman recedes from the clambering of desperate dead covered in that which makes them function. She slithers into the shade with a harrowed turmoil that gnashes its teeth as if it bathed in the eternal molten ocean of a tyrannical deity's hellscape. She does not fear us. This woman is desensitized to the nudity and gore paraded around in the final of wars. Her head turns towards our destination. The mandible of her jaw ripples with a clenching of teeth, and thin skin hugs the contours of dramatic features. She asks if I have seen the child, and we nod. With that, a warning is issued. There is no innocence in decay, and nothing is more unvirtuous than that which still holds life amongst it. Vascular hands and feet lift with visible ligaments like the open top of a piano during a concerto. She returns to the cesspool of guts and limbs with closing eyes and a faint smile. Even the damned must bond. Chapter 4. Waywell. I ask the parasite to tell me its thoughts. It tells me that thoughts are a product of the conscious mind, and it lies beyond such trivial processes than simple material. I ask it to humor me. If I am to host my body until it is no longer mine, then it can at least do that. It stays silent, slithering around in a cycle of deconstruction to reconstruction. What matter is there to tweak in a dream? It finally replies, the way we name each other. But many of us share the same name, a facet of our identity and a telling sign of our mass reproduction. I smile. Let me name you Parasite. It grants me the privilege, and I begin to think. A thought to Descartes, his very entry into phenomenology, was to confirm the individual's existence. He doubted because he was. It was very close to the truth. He doubted because we are. The parasite would not appreciate a name that had already been given. And with so many names and sounds assigned to humans throughout time, I cannot assure its originality. A Herculean task for a mere mortal, nevertheless. I shall try. I have brief memories of before birth. Many would call these false memories. But there is no false or truth, only occurrences. It was not blackness, but shapes of unexplainable color that ran through one another, as if they were galloping spectral horses. These amalgamations of fracturing wavelengths burned, cindering into the backdrop of an endless gorge. The very witnessing of such things suggests I must have had eyes. But I did not blink. I felt nothing. And I was not astral either. I was a currency of divine electricity cascading through the neuron of the hive. Maybe my sentience had activated early imprinting such a distortion as some quasi-memory. There was an interlocking of sizzling colors. The gorge opened into infinity, and as I began to feel the presence of something physical, a strange noise clapped loudly as I briefly heard the thought of God itself. There are no letters to phonetically replicate the sound, not in any language I know, so I will settle for the closest representation I can muster. Parasite, I shall call you Webu. That is my name, and so you shall share it until one is victorious. A fizzling of fibers run through my spine and transfers into my legs as if hot water was being poured down them. The backdrop of war-torn society fades from defined to abstract. The parasite is reaching closer to the hive, and there has yet to be any objection. A strange play for the creator of all to willingly let itself be consumed by a foreign entity. Humans have rights. Such things began with Aristotle's ponderings on justice, which only applied to free men. Does the hive not consider itself free? I'm running out of time. My human portraits will have no artistic value to the parasite and the hive mind. I have no tools at my disposal to prolong my sentience or join this match. I'm just a vessel, a form that serves some significance past my own understanding. The parasite infected me as I lead to the mind that encompasses us all. But why are humans of so much significance? The entire universe exists in this delusion also, an infinite expansion comprised of complexities that deepen in nuance further than anything on Earth. Would it not be easier to create a singular mind that alludes to an infinity that does not truly exist, rather than an actual infinite cosmos comprised of unfathomable detail? I believe such a thing was referred to as a Boltzmann brain, an ambitious thought experiment that scratched the surface of the real. Many have been aware, fleetingly. Jung called it the collective unconscious, although he was not referring strictly to a hive mind. Strange, through the lens of philosophy, I can only attribute one theory to the creator: solipsism. It believes it is all that exists, and we are shadows cast against the wall to mimic shapes and forms. Plato spoke of the allegory of the cave in a similar fashion. Does my introspective inquiry not dispute the hive? Surely the act of introspection into such forbidden knowledge refutes the very notion that only a singular consciousness is truly in control. It speaks to me. I hear it. The parasite hears it. Why would it speak to itself? A further sign of schizophrenia, perhaps, surely, although my notions of reality are based on illusions and human-made social constructions. Surely such things must harbor the DNA of what was once original. How can a truly original fiction come to an inception with no inspiration? Everything must be an echo from a source. So what is the source for the hive? Such questions remind me of my questions about the Christian God as a child. If God made the universe, then who made God? Where does all of this begin? A big bang, nothing reversing itself. A singularity became plural. A single color produced the entire spectrum. One atom made infinity. The hive created all, and all is the product of one. Such binaries are unequal, and the scales are tipped into oblivion. Chapter 5. Abstractions and Atrocities. A fog of chemical warfare blankets the forest ahead. We have left the city, and the road is at its end. It is truly a marvel, the acts of the void. Extremes are what define us. A murderer is known for their murder, and saints are known for their good deeds. Porcelain bombs filled with fleas infested with AIDS, and anthrax fell on small towns and natural reserves, such things concocted by the disturbed minds of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. To see them recreated in the final war, one so far ahead of that time. To know the void is without human morality more so than ever. There is no evil stronger than that which does not define itself as so. The little mites bounce from diseased body to body. The chemical gas finished the job. How long have these men and women suffered before they succumb to toxic air that tears apart lungs in a frenzy? They scamper across eyes, half-eaten lids, and bubbling skin as raw as the surface of the sun. The void has been demonstrated in the form of its favorite vehicle, the war atrocity. The sunlight lies ahead. So far, this walk has been one of increasing macabre. Society labeled me as a psychopath. For injury, and the end of my own physical destruction was after I had doused bare feet in boiling water. I screamed, cried, laughed, and finally found myself aroused. A sick mind by humanity's standards. A strange choice for a martyr. I had taken 2 lives before I was caught. Both had been branded near countless times, and the news ran wild with the external bleeding of my disturbed psyche. Years of solitude inside a cell lead to me breaking down my own existence. I could not melt mine or anyone else's flesh. In as such, I melted the surface of my soul with my thoughts hot and blue, a spiritual pain that dwarfed scoldings of the physical. To trace a thought back to its inception is no easy quest. The first was defining where my violent urges had stemmed from. They had begun in hell, there was no doubt about that, and they had transpired from biblical terror to sexual fantasy. The primary consensus was that I suffered from a lack of mirror neurons. I, like most killers, could not empathize with the living or the dead. This I never felt was true. My empathy was misplaced, but it existed. It had its place as a concept of reality. I wished those whom I had killed shared my pleasure, and those whom I had not could understand it. Semiology-induced stimulation is an ultimate taboo amongst civilized society. Most humans define happiness as a shade of comfortableness, but I, unfortunately, felt differently. I did not quarrel with being locked up like a dog in a cage. There is little alternative for minds such as mine. The lobotomy is unethical, and rehabilitation impossible. Socialization and nature had failed me, and in turn I had failed the standards of society, an act of mutual destruction. Thomas Hobbes referred to the state of nature as a war of all against all. Harm is inherent within our system, an undying urge that must be satisfied through some means. The academics would label this as deterministic, but it is undeniable the hands and minds of the human are many things, both biological and immaterial, and violence exists in both states of matter. That is how I knew when the parasite had infected me. I lost my urge to scold, and no sexual pleasure is yearned for by me anymore. I kill because it appeases the parasite. To know the hive feels the minor flick of death also. I have been cured by the eater of reality. That is all it took. The mastication of the source architect of everything. There was a price to pay. I lost my inevitable determinism that plagues humankind like a swelling sore that spreads if the immune system even weakens for a second. Then you are new. I am fading. I feel it. The parasite is allowing me one last attempt at compartmentalizing existence, but it is not revealing if I am progressing or regressing. Trees bend into bridges with bark that peels like the skin of a snake, and leaves are without texture and drip carelessly overhead. The abstract has begun. Like Dante and Virgil, I am about to ascend into the deepest recesses of the void. The blurring haze dissipates, and I emerge from the oasis of deforming nature. I hear the parasite's presence return, and I no longer remain as an I, but a we. Chapter 6. The Wheel of Human Consensus. There lies a mass of thriving interwoven limbs and faces soldered together through deformations of order and the conjoining of electrons defiling the consent to repel. The monster rolls itself as the amalgamated human wheel, chattering and bickering as their heads are pressed into stone, only to emerge scuffed and pride-ridden. Genitals dangle and twitch as arms grope one another. This is the public consensus, a hive of its own. The rolling stops, and it fashions itself towards us, heads all turning and whispering in a choir of horror. It asks us of ethics. We reply that there are no longer such things. Wrong, it howls. The symphony of incomprehensible whispers amongst the heads starts again. Giggles erupt from the lower portion of the wheel. All eyes focus on us once more. What of status? We reply, status is the vice of thought. There is no hierarchy amongst the living four that is reserved for the dead. The wheel edges closer. New faces arise now for further questioning. The monstrosity dwarfs us in stature, comprising 1,000 bodies. Status of the dead. An eruption of voices clamber over one another. We remain calm, and Weiwo, the parasite, laughs. To return to non-existence is more genuine than existing under hidden pretenses. Therefore, the dead hold status over the living, we state. The wheel circles us. Each mouth sings its own song, a gurgle of uncoordinated noise that rapes our ears. I take control in frustration. The parasite has let its guard down, and with a strained roar, I tell them there are no more than a sea of pebbles, criticizing each other. Dehumanizer, they scream. Hysterical movements of objection thrash and claw at the air. Value, value. Has the integrity of an individual's life had no value? Dehumanization, pseudo-speciation, stripping the fundamental identity of the human. All such things end in genocide. Humanity does not deserve the extinction of its life, only its self-righteousness. The ego death of man cannot occur without the ego death of God. In this case, the hive must cast aside its status of existence and grant its orphans phenomenological equality. The mass of life is inherently a contradiction. There is no greater villain than the collective, but there is also no greater victim. A dichotomy mankind has struggled with since it ascended the bicameral mind. The hive no longer directs. It allowed the voices of an external commander to become our own. With the gift of internal dictation came the responsibility of external freedom, and thus our fictions manifested into good and evil, structure and order, status and ethics. The abominable wheel spins gently, new faces from side profile to portrait as it ponders our answer to its outburst. What of natural value? The heads all simultaneously raise their eyebrows in anticipation of our response. The parasite grows restless inside my brain like a worm that infests an apple. Thomas Aquinas supposed there was a hierarchy of law, like the statuses you speak of, the eternal law that only the hive itself would know of, and the human law which was the lowest, beneath even the state of nature, and what it gives us. Such things suppose humans hold inherent value. We are not special and there is no morality, and the natural state of things is an infinite equation of circumstances. Such a totem pole of twisting flesh and eyes, apertures from which conflicting swarms of voices arise from, are hard to identify. They at times all move against each other in a near sickening level of conflict. At others they become one, a unison of sorts, as if they truly emulated the hive, in as close a physical form as can be mustered. Good, good, it cries. Our answer has pleased it. And a plethora of hands begin to rub all around the sea of bodies in celebration. The wheel that spread through Eurasia as one of the first innovations of both technology and a foreshadowing of the global hive of interconnected minds was a triumph. For it to end in a form of those who created it is now an echo chamber of favoritism towards the life of an individual, when itself is comprised of an indistinguishable mass. Truly a grotesque thing. I have done unspeakable things to the mortal shell, used it for my own pleasure in ways that if natural morality truly existed, a being such as myself would be struck out by the nib of the cosmos. Now tell me, man and parasite, how should the needs of many be met? I grow tired of this. I tell it that the needs of many are met the same way a dog stays loyal. We are given just enough to survive with the occasional surplus. A fool, it screams, the abomination cannot be consoled, and we have little time for humoring it. We seize an arm and yank it to the floor where it remains on its side, unable to regain its posture. Babies fall from the women tied to umbilical cords that drag them into the soup of flesh. They parrot the words of their peers, sinking deep into stomachs. Freedom of thought. There is no such thing for the underlings. Drops from a swollen grey cloud that are unaware of the atmosphere, forming puddles only to be dragged back up again. It has become clear to me as I have traversed this last of the world with Weiwo as my passenger. The hive cannot exist without the illusion of multiples either, for continuity is a necessity for even one. How can a monarch rule without subjects? Chapter 7. The True Human. There is a being ahead. It adheres to neither traditional masculinity nor femininity, an androgynous limbo holding a shard of glass whose edges sink into its soft palm. A Deleuzian fever dream, beautiful in its inherent animation, drenched in an unheard-of material that existed inside the wound of human identity. Silk skin, jaunty and abstract with sharp angles and graceful dictation through the space such a divine creature occupies. Like Narcissus, this purgatory of autonomy gazes at itself in blood-streaked glass, and it becomes clear to us. We have found the true human. God of texts and ideology defined itself as Alpha and Omega, omnipotent and omnipresent. But God is all man wants to be, and as such we have found God. It finally looks towards us, face refined to such a degree of geometrical perfection that the skin laying over it would dare not move, turning itself marble. Each frame of time this being occupies renders itself the magnus opus of human aesthetics. Shadows cast themselves in luxury with no better subject on earth to exist without light. Once the penultimate form of humankind is no longer, only I and Weiwu shall remain. And then I too shall succumb to the void, passing my story over to this parasite. I, an imperfect man, immoral and sadistic, a torturer and murderer, with evil that removed steps from the ascension up the ladder of good. I am at peace with this. Good and evil were concepts to justify emotion and control progression. They have no purpose in this null reality. I shall tell you the accumulation of my life parasite, and then we shall act against such a perfect specimen of all beauty was and is. Once that is over, you may leave my vessel and my existence and face the hive into the sunlight. There were no transcending beliefs that stemmed from my parents. They idolized only one thing: the sense of virtue that presented itself through hard work. They believed all that was worth knowing lay within the laborious hours of toil towards their daily goals. No dogmas other than an effort towards the institutes within which they existed as the drops of blood that formed a stream through the circulation system. They knew the jobs they dedicated the portion of their lives within which they had the most enthusiasm to experience, saw them as expendable. But this did not matter. I held no ill will towards the overwhelming mentality of contributing to the daily necessities of existing within a progressing society. Once a fellow worker at the factory, my father served as a technician for middle-range watch pieces, thrust upon him the idea of Marxism. He told my father the common sentiment of such thought. We work all day as an essential process of the mass production of these watches, yet most of us cannot even afford them. My father did not consider himself a proletariat, or the ones above him as bourgeois. He did not care for status or hierarchy, no matter how empirical monetary value made it seem. He existed to function, and his melody played on an instrument of assimilation to whatever church of capitalism he was subscribed to. He knew an end goal mattered little. Time would eventually melt all within the warmth of its palm. Such a thing is the cause for the word inevitable. Wittgenstein attributed symbols of language as purposeful structures to the overall creation. A bed consists of legs, a frame, a mattress, and maybe even a headboard. My father did not wish to be the bed, or even care if the bed was used. He merely wished to act as Atlas did, holding the weight of something that surpasses his own accumulation on his back in a seemingly infinite strain. It was not a celestial sky he held, or even the frame and mattress of a bed. His weight was the unexpelled energy at the end of the day. My mother held similar sentiments, but her work was more drenched in delusion. She would nod her head and agree that she was expendable, that she was not paid enough, and that her time could have been spent more pleasurably. She agreed to the rantings of the common kin, but she did not believe them. Her assimilation into the mass of hands that fiddled and rearranged innovations to be abused by the consumerist drunk soul was no more than a facade. She enjoyed the work and often inadvertently asked for overtime. So much so that they would often not even ask, instead adjusting the rota and informing her of such. She too held an inherent energy inside of her that could only find temporary satisfaction through its expulsion upon meaningless labor efforts. For them both, it was a catalyst to survive, and whilst they differed in the consensus of why they dedicated themselves so vigorously, it had the same result. None of this I begrudged them for. In fact, I admired it. I too would work hard for my own pleasure. Unfortunately, my work became that of foul absurdities. On the way home from school, I would often pass a church, something of an ornament to the village, serving no use, but its mere presence was necessary. Globalization became a hyper-rendition of what once notes passed between students of terrain, and soon our village became a town, and the church was renovated and put to purpose once again. Now I would hear voices of cocksure men proclaiming that God not only existed, but that punishment was on the cards for those who had not acknowledged such. I was interested. The punishment did not scare me, but I knew that something far beyond my capabilities could inflict a repercussion of similar proportions. This is when I heard of the eternal consequence, a realm of unfathomable torment propagated by a being so close to God that it acted as its antithesis. Satan, the binary to the Lord, the evil to good, the temptation to free will, the bourgeois of suffering. An inverted Marxism of sorts. The proletariat, instead of working for suffering they could not afford, were force-fed it by an endless worker of its production, Lucifer. As a morbid fascination grew, the ultimate aftermath of answering the most divine of questions wrong could not even be produced by God, but by a creation that sole purpose was to fill this gap. I knew that people bowed their heads in the hope of grace from the awful wisdom of a tyrannical deity that turned those who showed an ill will to stone. Sodom and Gomorrah showed me the wrath of this biblical protagonist, but even this vengeful entity would not commit immeasurable pain to so many. I leafed through Bibles from many derivatives, from the book of Job and the indignities he faced to settle a bet between good and evil, to Old Testament pestilences killing thousands due to the actions of one. I was baffled. What did this hell hold within it that even a violent omnipotence would not partake within? I had decided, due to the immense weight of my own faith in divinities at the time, that God's violence was calculated, measured, and a counteract to those who had attempted to demean what unbounded vigor he possessed. The devil, Hades, evil, it was uncalculated in comparison, an endless torment for pleasure's sake. It did not justify itself with the reasoning of belittlement. It saw its wrath as a purpose within itself, a job to be complete. Much like those who went along with war atrocities, few revolt when torment seems not only the accepted norm, but a task in need of completion. The body of any institution, even one of punishment, can only function with organs. Durkheim called it functionalism when referring to the structure of society. The functionalism of hell was what had fascinated me. The organs were the indoctrination of the acceptance of torment, not only as normal, but necessary, for that is why this place of horrible anguish exists. Two things emerged my fascination with replicating this torment, and my enlightenment into warped ideas of philosophy. My thoughts are now stitched together by endless references to the discipline. It has allowed me to deepen the interrogation of my own being. It has nurtured a disconnect to the ideas of morality that society informs the budding indoctrination of young minds. Though this was no fault of the thinkers that plagued time and theory, I could only lament their work and deform it to fill the growing container of my metaphysical identity. My first victim was a man, large and intimidating. A gruff face thick with dark stubble, layered knuckles bowed from gorilla-like hands. Physically, I was no match. I knew it, and so did he. For despite an attempt to warn him of his impending doom, he pushed me to the floor and laughed. By now, my ideas of God had transcended one specific doctrine, and for my notion of hell, I based it upon Vyasa and his work, Garuda Purana, a book attributed to Hinduism that documented the punishments inflicted in the realm in immense detail. It was something I could quasi-replicate. I took the man to my realm of hell for 28 days. He died on the 20th. There was no regret that filled me, no clarity that swarmed my fantasy back into sobering reality. And at this point, I knew that there was no hope for a different outcome. I had no intention of hiding what I had done. I did not even consider the law or how I had violated the social contract in place to stop me. My interest lay within my ability to hold such dreadful power over the person of my choosing. In a way, I was not playing God, but Satan. Many a classical dramatization had been made over my sword. Often people attributed with the all-encompassing new skin of immorality are the work of Satan. It was clear to me that there was no one evil, nor was there one good. If such opposites must exist, then the very spectrum from which they infest would pose defining them a near impossibility. This applied to the ones that circled good, but were not dark enough for evil, the void around sunlight, a no man's land of moral ambiguity. My second victim was the officer who investigated his disappearance. The time spent in my land of torment was much less, and the actions were considerably worse. I imagine if justice in any form truly exists or holds any kind of merit as a byproduct of the hive, I will not live in hell. I would enjoy such a thing too much. Instead, granting me eternal peace in a voidless sunlight would be the only state worthy. The true human stands dropping the shard of glass into a glistening veil of dust. We approach it with malice. As before, my hands wrap themselves around a neck that never won this perfect. Such blasphemous intent penetrates me with a dagger of immorality, and for the first time, I feel the vile nature of my existence. We both wrestle as Jacob had against God in the form of the seraphic, but I know no blessings shall be bestowed once it is over, and I am aware of my opponent. It seizes my pelvis between its forearms and delivers a force that winds me with a resounding crunch. The perfect creature then plunges its pressed fingers like the head of a snake down my gullet, and with an exhale, the parasite splats to the ground. Deformed thing, never holding a shape for long, constantly morphing under the dissolving medication of consciousness. It has lost its vessel in man, but found a new one in all mankind aspires to be. Like a sunflower drunk on an overly generous sun, the parasite rises into the body of perfection. It does not fight for, this was its intention all along. I feel like a fool. I thought I held a key to an important door, but I was nothing more than transportation, moved through imaginary space as I dissected imaginary reality. I am nothing more than a human after all. The parasite now occupies the archetype, a muse to all of humanity, its skin golden and flawless, towering height and divine aura that radiates a blurring of distance indistinguishable from an orange star setting on an absorbing desert. Begins to talk, for now I will hear its origins as I had shared my own. Falling to my knees, I offer my neck, long and fragile. The true human stands over me with its unthinkable glory, begins to recite its inception, beginning with the first words the hive uttered.